Hey guys, I'm Rachel, and speaking of Kenya, I'm going to talk about following your gut and how that both got me arrested in Kenya and out of a Kenyan jail. You ready for that? So I promise I wasn't doing anything illegal, believe it or not. But this was summer of 2012. I was in Nairobi working on seeds on the back end, and I was with my friend Peter, this other American kid from Iowa. So we were super white, super obvious American tourists. And we went out to dinner on this Friday night, and we were thinking, like what would be a fun thing to do tonight, right? And I don't know how many of you have spent any time in Nairobi, but throughout the city, there are these signs that say, visit a witch doctor, he'll cure your ills, you can ask to have your fortune told if you visit a witch doctor, and there are phone numbers. So we thought, hey, this could be a fun thing to do, a very sort of Kenyan thing to do tonight, this Friday night. So that's what we decided to do. We called a cab driver, and we called a witch doctor, and went to go visit this witch doctor. None of this is illegal, as I said. And so we're in this slum, Kawangware. It's one of the smaller slums in Nairobi. And the cab driver gets out of the car to smoke a cigarette, and the witch doctor gets into the car to tell our fortunes, right? And he's not in the car for more than 2 or 3 minutes, this poor guy. And all of a sudden, he turns and looks over sort of in front of where the car is, and we see these 4 guys on foot with AK-47s literally coming around this gate in front of the car. And they made the cab driver get on the ground, they made the witch doctor get out of the car, and then 2 of them hopped into our car and just drove us away. And they didn't identify themselves, they didn't explain what was happening, they kind of yelled at us and asked why were you in this place at 11 o'clock on a Friday night and so forth. And we were just we're screwed, we're being kidnapped. But as it turns out, I guess, luckily, these guys were cops. They were corrupt cops. So they took us to a police station nearby, and they took our cell phones. They refused to let us call anyone we knew or to call the US Embassy, anyone that could be helpful to us. And they held us in jail overnight. And I don't know if anyone else in the audience has spent any time in a jail in the developing world. I'm lucky that it was only one night for me. But it was exactly what I would have imagined a sort of what a jail would be like in a developing country. It was all sort of cement. There was a hole in the floor to shit in. And there was another hole in the wall to kind of let in some natural light, and that passed for a window. And that was it. It was just cold and dark, and there was a separate cell for women and a separate cell for men, so Peter and I were separated. And that was probably the trippiest moment, because we didn't know. Again, no one knew where we were. No one who knew us knew what had happened. And we were separated, and they were holding us, and we had no idea, how long it would last. So again, luckily, it was just that night. The next day, they let us out. They had us go talk to the boss of the jail, who came in the following morning. He hadn't been working that night. And he interviewed us separately and asked what we were doing, and it became very clear after some time that they wanted to extort some cash. They'd held us so that they could get some cash out of us. So there was a negotiation, and they decided that they were going to take us to an ATM at a nearby sort of mall area. So we get in the car with them. They take us to this ATM. They have Peter get out and go to the ATM first, and they have me wait in the car. And he's coming back, and then they ask me to go to the ATM. And this is the moment where, following my gut, I think got us out of this situation in as favorable a way as possible, to spoil the ending a little bit. So I got out of the car, and I thought, everything in my gut tells me that I should make a scene in this public place. I shouldn't just go and do what they tell me to do. I should ask someone to help us, right? So I got out of the car, and instead of going to the ATM, I ducked into a shop. And there was this tiny little Indian Kenyan woman behind the counter. She was 5 foot tall, which I don't know what that is in metric. Sorry, I'm American. Yeah, she was short. She was this tall. So she's behind the counter, and I went up to her and I was please help us. These cops have taken us for no reason. We did nothing wrong. They've held us overnight. We haven't slept. They took our phones. Could you please call the embassy? And she's get behind me, get behind the counter. So I got behind the counter. The cops obviously noticed that I had disappeared very quickly. They came in, and this guy was 6'3", he was very tall. He saw me behind the counter and immediately just reached for my dress. And she's trying to block him, and she's just this little tiny person. And she's got her phone because she's going to call the embassy. He grabs the front of my dress, drags me out from behind the counter, and drags me into the parking lot area. And at this point, things were serious. They were pissed off. They were really unhappy with us, with me specifically, because I was the one that made this decision. And they ripped my dress completely to shreds. They ripped my bra in half. So I'm like in this parking lot area, just like naked from the waist up. And just now we were committed. Now it's just like, we can't get back in a car with these guys. They're furious. Who knows what they're going to do? And poor Peter, at this point, I didn't know if I'd made the situation worse for us or what the situation was going to be. So we just struggled. We didn't let them force us back into the car. And yeah, that was just the way it went down. And there were these kindnesses while we were there. This older Indian man who was probably in his 70s actually took off the sweater from his back and handed it to me so I could put it on to cover myself up. And it was just like one of the most touching things that anyone has ever done for me. But it worked out. She was able to call the embassy whenever the scene in the parking lot was happening. And it was okay. The US embassy showed up. And it was in that moment that I felt any emotion, only in that moment that I felt any emotion except for like anger and frustration. Just like these tears of relief very briefly, because it was like, things are cool now, everything's gonna be okay. And it was fine, and the cops got in trouble, we didn't have to pay the bribe, and so forth. So that was summer 2012, right? Backtrack to September 2009. This is what got me into this situation in the first place in sort of a roundabout way. So after I went to college at Duke University in the States, I moved to Chicago because I wanted to study improvisational comedy and comedy writing. But you can't make any money doing that at the beginning, or I couldn't, at least. And so I was working as a stock trader as well. I was trading futures and equities, for those of you guys who work in finance or have studied finance. And it was cool. You know, I made more money than I expected to in my early 20s. But I wasn't creating anything beyond like wealth for myself and the company, which is useful. But I don't know, I wasn't helping anyone except for myself. So I knew I was looking for something more. And meanwhile, while I was doing comedy writing, sometimes I'd write sketches that were terrible. Occasionally I'd write something that was all right. I think the best reviewed sketch that I wrote was a sketch called Mime Brothel, which was about a brothel full of mimes. And that was like well reviewed, but 30 people came to see it. Yeah, you guys can imagine what that might have been like. Yeah, so it was like a well-reviewed sketch, 30 people on a good night. It was like a fantastic night. So I was thinking more about how I could find a larger audience. And in the trading world, I was thinking about how I was always the only female trader or one of the only female traders at every shop I worked at, which was bizarre, I felt like, in 2008. And I think I was looking for something that would help women that was also sort of within the financial realm. So September 2009, I'm trading the European shift. It's 3 a.m. in Chicago. And I have a position on, so I'm reading a newspaper. And I come across this article about microlending and how it benefits women in particular. And this light bulb just went off. It was just this unexpected connection that kind of intertwined all of these things that I had sensed weren't where I needed them to be in my life. And I just thought, boom, like, this is a good investment. Loans are repaid with interest. For those of you who don't know what microloans are, they're literally what they sound like. They're tiny loans, sometimes as small as a few US dollars, usually made to women in the developing world who can't access capital in other ways. And the repayment rates are right around 100%. There are almost no defaults, and they generate interest and allow these women to have the ability to enter economies that they might have been excluded from in the past. So I thought it was just perfect. So and in terms of reaching a larger audience, I thought, what if I made a documentary on this topic? So I texted my little sister, who was in college at the time. It was 3 a.m., so she was up. And I was just like, Morgan, I'm going to make this documentary. And so I did, even though I'd never successfully made a film short prior to that. But it was just another instance of whatever, following my gut. And I think we've all had those moments, and you just gotta do it, right? So we shot on 4 continents, we could say. Because I was so inexperienced, I knew I had to surround myself with these really awesome team members who had made a lot of successful films in the past, and we were lucky enough to be able to do that. It was a featured presentation at the Chicago International Film Festival a few years ago. But we shot in Paraguay, and when we were filming there, we filmed this woman named Pablina Portillo. And she had 9 children, and her youngest child, when he was an infant, had a tumor on his abdomen. And the doctors had told her, he has a 10% chance of survival or something like that. So they proceeded to perform surgery, and he made it through. But the family had spent all of their money to cover his medical expenses. So they were completely broke. And she, right about that time, found out about microlending. So literally, she and 14 other women took out a loan for a total of $60 between the 15 of them. So So her share was literally $4. And she started a business. And her business was selling sugarcane cakes by the side of the road. And she was able to do that and start saving money, and she kept her family afloat. So it was just like, whoa, literally this amount of money that I spend, on a coffee, like 3 times a day, because I drink too much coffee. It's just like, this could change this person's life. So it was staggering. So we filmed in South America, as I said, and then we also filmed in Kenya, and that's what took me to Kenya the first time. And in Kenya, the story of women interacting with microfinance was different. It was a tech story. So it was amazing. Again, I don't know how many of you guys have hung out in East Africa, but virtually everyone has a cell phone. They're more accessible than clean water. So people that live in sheet metal houses, in shacks, have cell phones, and they can go out and purchase virtually anything they need to buy using text message. So they can go out to the street corner, they can buy produce from a vendor on the street, text message the payment in seconds, and the transaction is complete. So I saw this, and I was just like, this is amazing. And I came back to the States after we concluded filming there, and I just thought about, like, there have to be other industries that mobile money transfer can connect to. What could they be? And the non-obvious answer that presented itself was gaming. So, I mean, those things I think seem very disparate. Another unexpected connection, right? But the reason gaming and microlending make sense is because of women. The average social gamer is a 43-year-old woman. And if you guys have played World of Warcraft, probably some of you, anyone in here played World of Warcraft at all? Yeah, it's the largest multiplayer online game ever. It's giant. And the demographic of people that spends the most money in World of Warcraft is women over 35. So even sort of like a fantasy game that's, I don't know, I would have thought it was like 14-year-old boys like hanging out at their parents' house in the States or something. But it's women. So knowing that, and then also knowing that women benefited the most from microloans, and also that women made microloans through web-based sites that facilitate microlending, it was just like, boom, there's this demographic overlap. Here's microlending, which a lot of people in the developed world don't know about yet. What if we took this to gaming? We could take it to an exponentially larger audience and impact people's lives in a much bigger way. So that's how Seeds, my company, was born, and that's what we do. We embed microlending in gaming. And I, like my gut was really telling me, like, this is going to work. This is going to make sense. But there are a lot of failures on the way to kind of like getting this up and running. We made our own game and embedded microlending in this game. And the game was terrible. It's like, surprise, it's really difficult to make a hit game. And I spent, tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't related to what other people spend on games. It wasn't a ton, but I spent this money making this shoddy game, and it was a failure. But I learned from that experience that the smart thing that we need to be doing is partnering with popular games that people are already playing. And that way we can just get seeds in as many games as possible and make it ubiquitous. So that's what we're doing now. After that failure, I'm really excited to say that we survived that. I was super broke for a while. I used Airbnb, if you guys are familiar with Airbnb, which allows you to rent out your apartment or your house, rooms in your house, to travelers. So I got like a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that I couldn't afford, hoping that I could rent it out to enough travelers to be able to sleep on the couch and like cover my rent and food. And it ended up working. It brought in like 35 grand like that year or something, but it was just because there were people there. It was like a mini hotel. But it was really fun. So yeah, there were just ways that I was able to kind of make it work. So now I'm super proud to say that Seeds launched in our first partner game in January of this year. And we have about 40 partner games in the pipeline. We want to take this everywhere. And the reason it's working is because what we found is that the data indicates that if there's social good in a game, somebody that's never spent $1 in that game before is 58% more likely to make that first purchase. So people want to contribute to social good in games. We just have to give them an easy opportunity to do so. And once they make that first purchase, they make an average of 12.4 more purchases. So it's basically like another $25 coming into a game's economy just because Seeds is present. So it's a significant amount of money for a gaming partner. So yeah, we're super stoked just to see that this works, that people want to contribute, that incentives are truly aligned, and they're into this. So yeah, I mean, the next thing that my gut is telling me is that we can change gaming. I mean, the mission of Seeds is to transform the definition of what gaming is so that it's just ubiquitous, as I said before, so that it just exists in all games ever, so that kids in the future just think like, oh, this is a game, right? This is a fun thing that I play that has this social good component always. So that way we can harness some of the 3.5 billion hours per week that people spend globally playing games and reinvest that in social good. And I think that type of future, that's the kind of future that I would love to live in. I think it'd be awesome. So a little bit morbid. I recently read this article, maybe some of you guys saw it, but it was this study, and it was like what they were asking people on their deathbeds, what are the five top regrets of the dying? And the number one regret was, I wish that I had lived a life that was true to myself, not a life that others expected of me. So what I'd love to leave you guys with today is just this idea that we don't have to do that, right? Hopefully most of us aren't doing that right now. I think many of us may be doing it in some way, but we don't have to. We don't have to live with that regret, and we don't have to die with that regret. We can live a life that is true to our talents. We can follow our gut and follow our talents. And in doing so, what I have found, at least so far, is that these unexpected connections reveal themselves more readily. And in doing so, and sort of noticing these unexpected connections, we can do the things that transform our lives and transform the lives of others. Thank you. Thank you.